VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are at December 11th on the eve of Week 15 in the NFL. The Vikings fans can actually watch with interest the Rams and the 49ers because if the Rams lose, we ain't got to sweat it for the next 4 days. The Vikings will be in the postseason. I don't know if anybody's really sweating it, but I'm here with my wonderfully good friend, Josh Frey. How's it going, man? Week 15.
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, that was one heck of a win by the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday over Kirk Cousins. That was probably the most complete game that I think, even with their dominant stretch earlier in the year, I think that might have been overall their most complete game between Sam Darnold looking good, Aaron Jones playing solid, and then the defense just coming up and making big plays. Byron Murphy's interception was one of the most spectacular plays of this entire year, I think. So yeah, really good win and excited for a Monday night football game against the Chicago Bears.
I got to ask you this because I was with my good friend Yannick Eckhart at the game. I don't know that I have ever seen a wide receiver stab an interception with one hand and not cradle it. Like I see wide receivers do it somewhat frequently, especially in training camp practice, just for shits and giggles. But why on earth? And I'm not complaining. Why did Byron Murphy just say, I got the juice to catch this with one hand?
I don't know, but that dude is just playing with absolute confidence right now. It's his sixth interception of the season, right?
hmm
And
Yep.
yeah, in a contract year. The dude needed a big year to go out and get some money this offseason, and I think he's definitely earned it. And he's playing with the type of swagger that I don't think we've ever seen, and we haven't seen out of a Vikings quarterback in like probably 3-4 years at this point.
Oh, it's longer than that, I
It
think.
might be longer than that. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, I wish it was 3 or 4 years ago. That would have
Yeah.
been the end of the Zimmer regime. All right, I got
Yeah,
two
you're right.
housekeeping items to ask you about before we launch into your predictions for the remainder of the season. And they're kind of random, so bear with me.
Okay.
Jaylen Redmond, Minnesota Vikings, somewhat, I was going to say seldomly used, but he's starting to get some snaps. If he qualified for PFF's minimum snap count, which he's getting there, he would be the fourth best defensive tackle in football. This is a football team that you and I, for several consecutive off seasons, says, get us a damn defensive tackle. So I need to know, is Jaylen Redmond, this out of nowhere story, is it sustainable if he were to get snaps consistently? And or is this a mirage where a guy, just looks good for when he gets his shot?
Man, this is not a random question at all because this is one of my five predictions for the rest of the
Oh,
season.
no way. I stepped on it.
I think that by the end of the year, we're going to look at Jaylen Redmond as the number one defensive tackle on this roster. And
Wow.
Vikings fans are going to be pounding the table for this guy to be back in 2025. Like you said, this is a team that has kind of just put together a bunch of veteran journeymen at the defensive tackle position for pretty much ever since they signed, or ever since they walked away from Dalvin Tomlinson in the 2023 offseason when he signed
hmm
with the Browns. So yeah, it's been kind of Harrison Phillips is a nice piece. I think he's definitely he's obviously a contributor at that position. He's been a very solid starter over the past few years, but at the end of the day, we haven't seen like a young building piece that we can really say, okay, this is a guy that we can build around on the defensive line, especially in the interior of the defensive line. And I think that Jaylen Redmond he has kind of come out of nowhere, but he was a solid player at Oklahoma. UDFA last year didn't really get any chance with the Carolina Panthers, and now he's getting his chance to shine with the Minnesota Vikings, and he's absolutely living up to it. And his run defense has been absolutely spectacular, back-to-back weeks with multiple tackles for loss. And like I said, I think by the end of the year, we're looking at this guy as the number one defensive tackle on this roster.
Well, that would be absolute music to my ears, let me tell you. Not that we could wholesale cross defensive tackle off the list for good,
Right.
because you'd probably want some insurance policy, but it would make it so you maybe wouldn't have to obsess over a first rounder. I have to ask you this. Why is he different than these three examples? Last year, Kairos Tonga played decent, maybe not this splashy, but his PFF score was up there, and we're like, hey, we've got to bring him back. Nope, didn't want him. 2021, Armin Watts kind of went on a heater for his standards. And then they surprisingly cut him summer of 2022. And then in the preseason, T.Y. McGill a couple of years ago looked great and didn't matter. Why is Redmond different than those guys?
I think ultimately Redmond's just a little bit more athletic, especially
Okay.
if you look at like a Kairos Tonga. He was like the purebred nose tackle
Yeah,
type of
that's why
player
that's why
where
I loved him.
yeah, exactly. And I think Redmond can kind of just do a little bit of everything on the defensive line, unlike some of these guys. Like Armon Watts, he was a great pass rusher, but he couldn't stop the run
hmm
to save his life. And then Kairos Tonga was a great run stopper, but he couldn't really get after quarterbacks because he was just too big and not super athletic. Meanwhile, I think Jaylen Redmond can do a little bit of both, and that's why I think he can be a little bit different on this Vikings defensive line.
So be 100% honest with me. Did you know Jaylen Redmond coming into that draft a few years ago?
I actually went back last night and looked at some of my big boards, and I had him as the number 180 player on my 2022 big board.
Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
that's better than almost everybody because
Yeah.
most Vikings fans are like, who's number 61?
Yeah, exactly. No, I definitely didn't think that he was going to be this good, but he was somewhat on my radar, like probably a mid to late round type of player, but obviously didn't end up getting drafted by anybody. And that again, Kwesi Adefo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, they are great at finding these UDFAs, whether it be immediately after the draft or a couple years after their draft. And yeah, Jaylen Redmond's just another example of that.
Well, I'm going to prop you up right now because having him 180 on your big board would be about round 5, round 6, and his career to date emulates what you'd expect from that. Not
Yeah.
playing much first couple years, dominated, I guess, in the XFL, 4 sacks in 4 games, and then now giving some opportunity, which might be what he needed in the first place. He's shining out. So do not trash your own big board because that thing was right. All right, the last thing, or excuse me, the last bit of housekeeping I have is I would say that mock draft season is here. Maybe not for the Vikings because we're focused on how deep the team can go in the postseason. Field Yates posted one for ESPN today, and we have to start accepting that the Vikings pick is going to be down in the late 20s if this prosperity keeps continuing. So Field Yates outfitted the Vikings with Siobhan Ravel Jr. from East Carolina, a cornerback. You are wise on small school cornerbacks. Is this a dude at number 30 for the Vikings in theory? Is this too high for him, or would he be a good fit?
I think he would be a good fit. I do think that, especially if they do end up like you said, like number 30 overall, I think that that would be a spot where I think Ravel could go.
Okay.
I think he's definitely he's got the prowess to play man coverage on the boundary. I think he could honestly, I think he could probably step into the slot as well. So he'd kind of be like the Byron Murphy type that we thought we were going to get when we first signed him, just with versatility, not really awesome at any of it. Like you can throw him out on the boundary and he can definitely hold his own, but he's not going to be like a top 5 CB out there. At least that's what we thought. Meanwhile, that's what
We're getting.
Byron Murphy's kind of doing this year. But I think that it would be a solid fit, especially for a Viking secondary that kind of just needs bodies all over the place this upcoming offseason.
Okay, so this is the mental preparation for Vikings fans that the first rounder that we fought so hard not to trade, at least on shows like this, they're going to keep it. But now that son of a bitch is probably going to be in the 20s somewhere, barring some very odd collapse. And a guy like Siobhan Ravel, smaller school type dude that Josh can scout with some pretty good accuracy. He could be a guy to keep on your radar. All right, we already got one of your predictions off the board accidentally, and that is that Jaylen Redmond becomes an established baller that we do not want to see leave in the offseason, only here on a Dinker one-year deal. So that's number 1. What is your second prediction for the remainder of this Vikings season, regular and post?
So I have a couple statistical things on here that I'm going to get out of the way first. And number 1 on that list is I think Jordan Addison is going to hit that 10 receiving touchdown mark again in 2024. Obviously, yeah, these 3 touchdown passes against the Falcons was absolutely fantastic. I think is arguably his best game of his entire career against Atlanta last week. But 11 games, he's got 7 touchdowns. He needs to get 3 in the next 4 weeks. I think he gets it done, especially when you look at the division rivals that the Vikings are going up against over this final stretch. They're going to need their top 2 wide receivers in Addison and Justin Jefferson to really show up in those games. And Sam Darnold just keeps zipping the ball all over the place. So I think Jordan Addison hits that 10 touchdown mark. And if he does, he's just the 9th NFL player, assuming Sam Laporta doesn't also do it. He'd be just the 9th NFL player in NFL history to catch 10 touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons and join Randy Moss as the only Vikings to ever achieve it. So dude's joining some pretty elite company if he's able to get it done, and I think he will.
What took him this long to get cooking? Was it the chemistry with Darnold? Was it the ankle? Like, because if you play fantasy football, he was a guy you could pick up on the wire.
Yeah. I think it's probably a little bit of both. Like,
Okay.
obviously, I think the chemistry definitely takes a little bit longer. When you're a young receiver, you're going up with a quarterback who's kind of just not really figured out exactly what he's able to do at the NFL level. And I think in Sam Darnold, and I think that played a part of it early on in the year. And then the ankle injury definitely hampered him a little bit more. But now that everything seems to be flowing, that everybody knows their roles in this offense now. Jordan Addison's found his spot and he's absolutely thriving. And he was absolutely right when he called out Kevin O'Connell. It was like get number 3 more targets, and they've been doing that ever since. And he's living up to the billing once again this season. He's been absolutely fantastic over the past month or so.
I think we all know, after seeing his cleats and everything, that free three is his
Yeah,
slogan. It's not a trade request, people. The thing that I love, there's two things I love the most about Jordan Addison. It is anytime you throw at him, big plays happen. And like arguably to the magnitude of Justin Jefferson. Now, Justin Jefferson is a beacon of consistency that's going to catch everything for first downs. But Addison has that home run feel. And I think that
yeah.
is why the Vikings drafted him. And then when he does catch a ball, he pops right back up as if it was the most obvious thing in the world that he caught that. It's not a surprise to us or to him that he is becoming a star in the NFL. And it's not even to say like he's all humble. I'm not trying to say that. It's just that he expects to be that good, or when the pass is in the air, it's either going to be pass interference or he's going to come down to it. I go back to that Bengals game last year when Nick Mullins threw him a pass at his shoestrings and he caught it. And then it
That's
was like,
right.
pew, touchdown. And it was a no brainer that he was going to score. So I think this is the definition of playmaking. And it's so fantastic that he has hit his groove. This is the perfect time for it.
Oh yeah, and I think honestly playing alongside Justin Jefferson helps in that department where you just play with more confidence and you play with that swagger. Like I think Jefferson's impact is definitely rubbed off on Addison, and obviously it's helped him out a little bit in terms of he's not drawing as much
Mm-hmm.
attention in the secondary as Justin Jefferson is, but the dude's absolutely balling out right now, and it's showing not only in the stat line but just the Viking success in the 6-game winning streak. And like you said, it's coming at the absolute perfect time with 3 divisional games in the final 4 of the season. If the Vikings are going to try to sneak their way into this NFC North title, it's going to be because Jordan Addison continues to just ball out alongside his co-worker Justin Jefferson.
I also want to point out that when you revisit the 2023 NFL draft, the decision to take Addison over defense for now is utterly vindicated. I thought about this and I researched it. So our guy, Deontay Banks, has not caught on quite like we
Yep.
thought he would. He's getting a lot of snaps, but he's not that good, at least not right now. Maisie Smith in Dallas, not good at all. And then Brian Breesy, who the guy that I thought they would draft, really weird. He has 8 sacks, but then his PFF is like in the 30s. And it's like, I don't know how those reconcile because I don't watch Saints games that often. But there was some eyebrows somewhat that were raised. Like this team probably needed a defender in that draft for the long term. But they said, nope, we know what kind of coverage we're going to get henceforth to Jefferson. And we're getting Addison. And I don't know that there's a better case study for it than the Falcons game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of that decision is ultimately, I think, just Kwesi, as much as you want to hate on him for his drafting prowess, especially on defensive side, he absolutely nails every single free agency pickup that he picks on that side of the ball. Like you
Mm-hmm.
look at Byron Murphy a couple years ago, and then this year Andrew Van Ginkel, and you get Jonathan Grenard, who are arguably 2 of the top 5 edge rushers in the entire league this season. They've just been piling up numbers after numbers after numbers. Andrew Van Ginkel almost had his 3rd pick 6 this past weekend. It's just absolutely ridiculous what this guy's able. Blake Cashman, this dude just finds a way to get names that a lot of people overlook in free agency, but he gets them into this Vikings organization, and credit to Brian Flores as well. But just the ability that this front office and coaching staff has to pick up these mid-tier free agents and turn them into absolute stars on this side of the ball. I think that's part of the reason why they ultimately ended up going with Jordan Addison, is because, yeah, we could get a defensive lineman, we could get a corner, but we can also just go in free agency and pick up one of these guys as well. So I think that ultimately had played into some of that decision, but it's paid off in a big way, like you said.
And they're going to need that skill, that acumen in a couple months here
Oh
because
yeah.
they have 1 first rounder, 2 fifths, and we think a compensatory. We know a compensatory for Cousins walking. So still, the draft piggy bank is barren, all things considered. All right, Jaylen Redmond being a for sure thing for the Vikings. Jordan Addison crossing 10 touchdowns and continuing his ignition. What's number 3 on your list of predictions?
I'm going to go with Sam Darnold prediction. And I think that this is absolutely ridiculous if you were to say this in March, but I think he's going to finish top 5 in both passing yards and passing touchdowns when the season is over. And he's going to be, if he's not already, he's going to be firmly in the conversation for MVP if the Vikings keep winning games like they are right now and potentially go like 12, 13 and 4, 14 and 3. Just absolutely ridiculous that we're saying that, and it's with a straight face at this
Hmm.
point. Like, if you look at it right now, Darnold ranks 6th in terms of passing yards and he's 5th in passing touchdowns. But this past month, the last 4 games, the dude is on. If you were to stretch these 4 games into a 17-game season, he's on pace for 5,000 yards, 47 touchdowns,
Zero,
and 0
zero picks.
interceptions. It's just absolutely ridiculous what this dude has done over the past month. And to think that we were talking about all this, he's starting to come down. He's starting to come down. He's throwing all these interceptions. That 3 interception game was ugly. The Vikings are relying on their defense too much again. And now over the past month, he's just been like, yeah, this is just what I do now. And you take away those like 3 games in the middle of the season, this entire year has just been absolutely fantastic for Sam Darnold. And it honestly just makes me more excited for what we can see out of JJ McCarthy next year.
One thing we have to point out, and I don't know if this show was guilty of it, not really, but when you look back at that Jaguars game with the 3 red zone interceptions, the guy had a single bad game.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in that heat of that battle, they only won 12-7. It was tempting to think, hey, I wonder if Nick Mullins could inject something because the guy had thrown 3 interceptions. But when you look back, this happens.
Yeah.
Athletes have bad games. And
Yeah.
I remember pulling up statistics of dudes who had thrown 0 touchdowns to 3 picks in the last 2 years. Brock Purdy was on there twice, and there was somebody, other prominent dude. Nobody cared when they did it. I mean, the next night, Jared Goff threw 5 picks. We're all like,
Yep.
oh, that's cute. He'll be fine. But we didn't afford Darnold that grace. And I think we did, but the general world did not. And so I have to point out that, I mean, even if Darnold comes back and has a mundane Monday night game, like this happens in sports. It's not one single bad performance never defines the rest of the way, especially for great athletes. I have to ask you this on Darnold. If we assume that he's probably not going to quarterback the 2025 Vikings, if he goes to a team that is not part of the Mike Shanahan grand coaching tree, let's say it's the Titans, if they're ready to be done with Levis, can he replicate this, or is he going to go back to mid?
It's a very interesting question, and I do think that landing spot is going to play a big role in how good he is next year. And it's honestly like I don't even necessarily know if it's because of the coaching tree. I honestly think he's gonna need a similar type of wide receiver core, tight ends core that the Vikings have. Like, you're obviously not going to replicate what the Vikings have because it might be the best in the entire league at this point. But I do think that if you put him in a decent situation, like honestly, like the 49ers did last year. And I think that was a big piece of why he was able to come into the Vikings and be confident enough to be a starter. But you look at the early part of his career with the Jets and then the Panthers, like it's really no wonder why this guy struggled so much when you throw him into 2 of the worst franchises in the entire league. They're just the most incompetent franchises in terms of front office and roster building in this entire league. And even Aaron Rodgers hasn't been able to save the New York Jets at this point. So I really think that we might have oversold how bad Sam Darnold was early on in his career without really taking a look at what was going on around Sam Darnold because he's not able to control all of that. So I
Mhm.
do think that he's not going. I don't think he's going to be able to go to the Tennessee Titans and put up the same numbers that he's putting up with the Vikings and lead them to the same success. But I do think that he's at least going to be an average, competent starting quarterback in the NFL. And I think that the past 2 years have really done a number on his confidence and just got him back into, hey, I can lead NFL teams. I can go win games. I know what it takes now. So I definitely think he's able to do that.
So if this sustain is basically if Darnold doesn't collapse in the next 4 games and then hopefully 2 or 3 playoff games, whatever it is, every take about the Baker Mayfield season was correct. Everybody that uttered that, it was absolutely correct, and he might even be better statistically than Mayfield. So I think the long-term goal for him is to go to a franchise like Mayfield did, and he's just the starter, and we're not even talking about did the Buccaneers need a quarterback anymore. The other thing I want to say is there was a 2021 game, Vikings versus Panthers, the game where Osborne had the touchdown in overtime to walk it off.
Hmm.
There was a drive that Darnold led in the fourth quarter that was just systematic, and I was like, God, I didn't know that guy could do that. And he did it then, and not that he was a total badass that season, but I remember seeing that thinking, geez, this guy isn't horrible. And then my other Darnold take is I don't know if Josh McCown will get a promotion yet somewhere, but I low key think that if McCown goes to get an offensive coordinator job or a head coaching job, like, he has the connection to the Bears and the Jets, Darnold should just follow him wherever they go and they could be a package deal. That's a real fringe theory that I have right now. Any of that sound outlandish?
No, I mean, honestly, I hadn't really thought too much about that, but now that you bring it up, I think that's a perfect plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think those two just get together this offseason and be like, hey, where can we go win some football games? And that's where they end up going. That'd be really cool. I
Yeah,
like that.
teammates and then now coworkers, and it kind of feels like they're a package deal. I don't know if it can be finagled that way. If McCown would go to a team that needs an offensive coordinator or a head coach that also can bring Darnold, we shall see. All right, you got Redmond, you got Addison, you got top five finish for Darnold. Second to last prediction.
Second, this is I might get some guff for this one, but we've talked about this week 18 versus the Detroit Lions as like, hey, maybe the Detroit Lions are going to be resting starters in that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Vikings might be resting starters when
Holy
week
shit.
18 rolls around.
Oh, so now you're doing bold predictions, not just predictions.
Yeah, no. So here's my thought process with this. So the Vikings obviously, I don't think they're going to win the NFC North. I do think that they're going to hold down the number 5 seed pretty
Okay,
easily.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, they have a 2-game lead over the Packers right now, and basically all they really need to do to seal up that spot is beat the Packers in Week 17 at home. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're going to do that. I don't necessarily think they're going to beat the Seahawks in a couple weeks, which could give the Lions the edge that they need to clinch the NFC North by the time Week 18 rolls around. So if those two things come into fruition, then I think the Vikings are resting starters, and I think it makes sense considering they have to go on this road gauntlet of a playoff
Mm-hmm.
road to get to the NFC Championship game and hopefully to a Super Bowl. But I ultimately think that that's going to lead to the Vikings resting some starters in Week 18 against the Lions, and maybe not making this a full blown out matchup that we've kind of been thinking over the past couple months.
Okay, so the Vikings basically lock up the 5 seed no matter what.
Mhm.
The Lions, in your estimation, then will have to finish about 15-2. Is that right? Or
I
be
think
close
that
to it?
I honestly think that's what the Lions are probably going to end up being at, and they might honestly play their starters in Week 18 depending on what happens with Philadelphia over the next month. But I think that the Vikings if this comes to fruition, I think that this is just the perfect opportunity for Kevin O'Connell to just play with some things and see what he can do to try to get after this Detroit Lions defense and just see what actually works against this team, and try to just mix some things up with some of their reserves, and then hopefully you make it to an NFC Championship game and go up against this team again, and then you bring those ideas back into the game that actually worked, and maybe you can surprise everybody, shock the world, and go beat them in the NFC Championship game.
Well, they would be that's the only thing that really gives me excitement about matching up against the Lions in the postseason anywhere, whether it's divisional round, NFC Championship. It would be that O'Connell would be due to get Dan Campbell. I think they've lost 4 straight. They haven't won since the O'Connell's first game against the Lions in 2022. And you go into this powerhouse like the Lions. For us, it's just going to be a division game, the way that we know them or the way that we feel about them. And of course, their roster is mighty. But it will always give me solace that if the Vikings connect in any year, really, with the Packers or Lions or the Bears ever get good, that when it boils down to it, it's a division game at heart. I also want to point out that last week you ranked your, I guess, best to worst matchups in the postseason. The one that you'd rather not have is the one that's for now is trending the Vikings would play at Tampa Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you still think they'd win that game, correct?
Well, that's my last prediction. You teed me up again, and
Wow.
it's the Vikings are going to win a playoff game this year, at least one playoff game. It might be two, honestly, with the way that they're playing right now. It's just been absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I think that the Vikings are going to win a playoff game this year, whether it be on the road or at home, whatever it ends up being. The Vikings are going to win one, and Kevin O'Connell's going to finally get that monkey off his back. But I mean, yeah, you look at it. I think that the Buccaneers are the worst matchup that the Vikings could face, assuming that the 49ers don't sneak their way into the NFC West title,
Mhm.
and they are the number 4 seed. But I mean, you look at it, Tampa Bay, they're decent, but I don't think that they have the offensive prowess that the Vikings have at this point, and their defense hasn't been as good as it's been in years past, where they've had success in the playoffs. So I think that the Vikings can beat them, and then you look down the road. The other options are like we talked about last week, rematch with the Atlanta Falcons, who they just beat the absolute shit out of over the this past weekend, and then Los Angeles Rams rematch or Seattle Seahawks rematch. I think that they can beat either one of those teams, and hopefully, I'm hoping that the Vikings lose to Seattle just because of that, a possible playoff rematch on the road against them. And then the Rams game was it was a weird Thursday night game with Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, like we talked about, and I think that they can definitely hang with them. They did hang with them, and I think that you give them an even amount of rest for all their players. I think that the Vikings can beat them as well. So yeah, my last prediction is the Vikings are going to win at least one playoff game this year.
We will take it. And it's really kind of weird that the one team we'd rather not go play is at San Francisco, even though that they're a non-factor in this conversation right now. Isn't that weird?
Man, I gotta tell you though, that game against the Bears this week, that started to scare me a little bit. It seemed like the 49ers were starting to be like, okay, yeah, we actually have to actually kick this thing into gear now. And they
Hmm.
absolutely beat the crap out of the Bears on Sunday, which it scares me a little bit. Like obviously they're not in the mix yet, but give it a couple weeks and they play like this some more, it's going to be close, I think. I'm going to be sitting on the edge of my seat waiting.
One thing that came to mind this morning, I don't know what I was thinking about, but you know how a week ago when the Lions were about to play the Packers and we had the Twitter
Mhm.
discussion about who do we cheer for, and I gave my speech that I've tried to cheer for the Packers in situations like this and it never works. We might have an awkward scenario, wild card weekend, where if the Vikings have the 5 seed and the Packers have the 6 seed, you're going to want the Packers to beat the 3 seed to have a chance at hosting a playoff game because the Commanders, if they play the Eagles,
Mhm.
and that's not out of the realm of possibility that the Commanders will win that. In order to get a home playoff game in round 2, you might need the Packers to beat whoever their opponent is. Just planting that seed. I know that we probably won't be able to cheer for them because of the rivalry and the hatred. All right, so your predictions are Jaylen Redmond arrives or is here to stay. Jordan Addison hits 10 touchdowns. Darnold finishes in the top 5 statistical categories. By week 18, we're playing for nothing because they probably have the 5 seed locked up. And then no matter what, so long as it isn't the damn 49ers, the Vikings win a postseason game. Do we got them all covered?
We got them all covered.
All right, sweet. So the next time we talk, we'll be either talking about the 12-2 Vikings, which sounds so weird to say, and it'll be Seahawks week. And the Vikings notoriously do not play well there. They haven't won there since 2006, and they've lost 5 or 6 straight. Do you have a quick synopsis on the Seahawks before we log off?
I think that this team is kind of like the Vikings. They're starting to play their best football at the perfect time down the stretch of the season. You look at it, it's crazy. A few weeks ago, it seemed like the Seahawks were on their way out of the NFC West race, and then they put up a win, and then they go up and beat the Arizona Cardinals kind of dominantly last
Hmm.
weekend to really solidify themselves at the top of the division. I think the defense is starting to come together, and Geno Smith just continues to he's not spectacular by any means, but that dude he just finds ways to when he needs to, he makes plays. And we talk about Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson being one of the top pairings at wide receiver. DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba are starting to arrive at that point too. So I think ultimately that's going to be a really fun matchup to see those two offenses go up head to head.
Smith and Jiba is a textbook example of giving it a year with your
Yeah.
patience, folks. Kind of like Marvin Harrison, how we think probably for next year. Jackson Smith and Jiba was decent as a rookie, but when you look around at like what Justin Jefferson did 4 years ago, you compare them to the standard, and Jackson Smith and Jiba has arrived and arguably the WR1 now per production. All right, Josh, we'll talk to you in one week during Seahawks week. All right.
Sounds good. See you then, man.
All right, man. Take it easy.